Peter. This is Mike and Brittany. We're three members of the BYU Magazine team, and we're really excited to be here to talk to you today. Glad to see some friendly faces from work and other places that I've seen around. I want to start out by saying you are in luck. This is going to be a special treat because you have here before you three editors who have never had a flop, who have never had an issue that didn't sail out and go into our readers' homes and have them begging for more of this wonderful content. No, not really. We're pretty typical average editors, and we deal with the same problems that everybody faces in this business. And so what we've pulled together today is not so much pointers from experts who have it all figured out, but some ideas from people who are in the process, in the trenches, just like you are, trying to put out content that people will want to read. The way we've kind of split up, it's really eclectic what we've pulled together here, but it's kind of some micro things, small things that you can do to make your writing more engaging, and then bigger things that you can think about as you write for an audience and try to have your message be most effective. So Brittany's going to start for us and talk about some of those smaller scale things.
Okay, when I think micro, well, first a disclaimer. I don't know what all areas of publishing you're in. Lots of these tips obviously are specific to magazine writing, which is different. It's a niche, but hopefully there's some things you can appropriate to whatever sector type of publishing you do. So when I think about micro level things that make a story great, it starts with research. So I think the goal when you're coming to a story or a piece that you're writing is to become the 15-minute expert. And when I say that, I mean you could fake a PhD level for 15 minutes. So if you write about Minerva Teichert, Peter can hold down a conversation with you for 15 minutes and you'd think he could have been the docent at the Met. Were Teichert's works exhibited there. So that's what I mean there in terms of the research. So the first thing that I always try to do is cast my net as wide as possible. So, and of course you're under a time constraint, so it's as wide as you can given the time. And this is an article we did on diplomats in the Foreign Service, alumni in the Foreign Service. And this, I think more than any other story I've done, cast the net the widest. So that's why I want to talk about this story in particular. We're going to click through here. These are some of the individuals I spoke with. We'll just keep going, keep adding. Interview after interview after interview, and I found the deeper I got, the more people I talked to, the more I asked them who I should talk to, the better content I got. It got richer and richer so that by the time I was finally writing, I was able to distill. So that's, I circled this kid at the end just because that's the funniest part of that picture. I didn't want anyone to miss it. So casting your net really wide, and in that casting of the net, go for the big fish. Sometimes I feel like I'm writing a story and it's only going out to alumni of the university, or it has all these qualifications. It will only be this. But still, why not go for it? Why not go for the top, who would make this story the best? Who's the person speaking in it who would just be the ultimate source? So if we're still talking about this story, little fun fact here, these three individuals, Stephen Beecroft on the left, Deborah Jones in the middle, and Matthew Tueller on the right, are all BYU alums. All three were ambassadors and all happened to cross roads in the Middle East kind of at the same time. We had this trifecta of ambassadorships in one of the most crucial areas of the world right now. But there's an even bigger fish than that who was coming to campus. And I thought, oh my goodness, Condoleezza Rice, former Secretary of State, is coming to speak on BYU campus. The stars have aligned, I have to ask. And I was told initially, no, don't go after it. She hasn't granted any interviews. Well, I thought, I still have to try because I've been going after him, been ignored, right? Ambassadors have better things to do. Granted, I totally accept that. But casting your net really, really wide again, I thought Warren Beecroft has a son here at BYU. Or sorry, not Warren Beecroft. Stephen Beecroft has a son named Warren here at BYU. This is Warren. And I sat down with Warren. I got the best interview out of Warren. When you talk to an ambassador, they don't really give you much colorful stuff. They're pretty good at interviewing and pretty good at keeping things close to the chest. Warren told me the most fabulous story, which when I connected the two that she was coming, I said, I'm getting in touch with Stephen Beecroft. I got in touch with her publicist. And hearing Stephen Beecroft's name, he was her direct assistant when she was, for about a tenure, I think, of 6 years here in the States. And when she heard his name, she said, her publicist got back to me and said, oh, I'll grant you 15 minutes. And when he heard that Condoleezza Rice was granting me 15 minutes, he called me back. So it was wonderful in that way. And thanks to Warren, I got this fabulous story that brought down their walls. It's about a cat. Stephen Beecroft apparently makes the best cat impersonations. And in the State Department, he would, for almost a year, he kept Condoleezza Rice going, say, meow, and she didn't know where it was coming from, and she'd come say, where's this cat? And he would play this joke on her, and then it was just a really fun side story that gave me an entry point with both of them. Another point, to get the external validation. So we all crave external validation, and I think that's what makes stories really great too. So I can tell you something's great, but what really matters is when someone who is in the know can tell you. And I've picked a lot of these stories because I think they're pertinent to the LDS audience, or LDS-focused audience we have here. This was a story. We have a cartographer here on campus who put together this atlas. It was called Mapping Mormonism, and it's all sorts of maps from history, modern times, the church today. And I thought, I need someone saying this map is great besides us, because we think it's cool. We're LDS, we're saints, we think it's fabulous. So I tracked down Daniel Cole. It wasn't easy, and it only was a line in my story, but I feel like that external validation counts. It helps make a story rich. So he was one of the judges. He works at the Smithsonian, and he said National Geographic didn't hog all the awards this year. Another example, we did a story on Provo, on the music scene here. It's so great, and I feel like that's a story we hear a lot here in Utah, and we hear it again and again, but no one outside of Utah is saying it, so I keep questioning, is it true, is it true? So we got in touch, we pushed on some of the music venues to find some of the higher-ups in record labels, and to have someone else say it, I think, gives it credibility. So that helps make a story sing, is credibility. Of course, going there when you're writing about a topic, writing about a person, being physically present. This is a story about a program, also again an LDS-themed story. The church taps the university to send students 2 by 2, not as missionaries, tagless, to different areas around the world to share employment tips, to help them through workshops to either start their own business or to make themselves more employable. And so we tagged along with 2 students in Peru. Now I understand you can't always go across the world, but I think you can also do this in interviewing. So when you're trying to go there in an interview, you want to get a scene in slow-mo. So whether you're there or going there via interview, getting a scene in slow-mo involves asking all the questions about where we're at, all the 5 senses. And so when I was there, I wanted to point out what stuck with me was this little guy. Everything that was going on, of course, but it was a fun detail in the story that Bestia made this story. This is their little dog. He's wearing the provincial soccer team jersey, but getting that kind of color that paints the scene for your reader. And I think just a scene in slow-mo, because you don't have time, at least in a magazine article, to stay in that level of storytelling, but I think it's so fun for a reader to drop in and be there for just even a couple graphs. So again, I mentioned interview for all 5 senses. This is back to the diplomat story. This is one of my favorite things I got from Stephen Beecroft. This is church in Iraq. This is what it's like. The billiard room isn't closed. The ricocheting of pool balls faintly punctuates prayers, talks, and lessons. The guys in camouflage carry guns, including sidearms. When they give talks, teach lessons, pass the sacrament. The woman, my favorite part at the end, who plays the keyboard, accessorizes with an M16. So I suddenly feel like I'm there at church in Iraq, and it's got the imagery that I think helps make a story sing. When I'm in an interview, this was a tip that I saw at a conference that I try to hold on to, and I've actually pirated the slide from that conference. It's the next one. It's pressing on the unsupportive adjectives, because I think we get a lot of unsupportive adjectives, at least in our line of work, when we're trying to talk about something that's great. Everybody wants to tell you about something that's great. So here's what I don't want, and this is what I hear a lot. We are a unique university with cutting-edge facilities and the world's most innovative programs. But drilling down on those, replacing that, okay, replace it with an example, replace it with an example. We are the first university to 3D print hamsters in a 4,000 square foot lab designed by Kanye West. This is the slide I stole because it reminds me, okay, drill down on great, drill down on unique, and come up with some concrete example that paints the picture for your reader. When interviewing, I think it's really important to try to drive for that emotion. So I tried to interview until the source has laughed or cried. And that sounds malicious, it's not. I mean it in a positive tier. This is a story that I think paints that idea. Is anyone familiar with honor flights? For those who aren't, it's a nationwide nonprofit that takes veterans back to DC to see their memorials. And it's a big push to get World War II veterans there because they're now in their final years, and many are passing away without having made this trip, and to commemorate them, to commemorate the service they've given. So in the effort to make someone laugh or cry in their interview, this is Ora Mae Hyatt, and she gave me just the best story laughing as we drilled down. It was, oh, and I forgot my magazine. The story goes like this. She was a nurse in Okinawa, and she wandered off on a jungle road and saw some American trucks coming in, this convoy, and she waves to them. And it's an American girl on the side of the road in Okinawa, and the first truck slams on its brakes, and the second slams into him, and the third slams into the second. It's just this collision, this train of collisions. And she starts laughing, she runs back to the nurse, and she can't let anybody find out. It was this great story. I have to share some of the photos from this story because our photographer Brad Slade came along, and they were just beautiful. But I also want to tell you about someone who I made cry, and it's, like I said, it sounds awful, but I think it's so important. His name was Francis Simmons, and he was a World War II veteran celebrating his 100th birthday while we were out. And we were visiting, and I kept drilling and drilling because I wanted a real war story. And what he said, and it actually is one of the quotes later on in the presentation, but he told me about coming upon when they were liberating, not Normandy, they were pushing further east, and they were in Poland, and they came upon this burning warehouse. And he said, we came up, and there were still people in there, and the Nazis had fled, and we had to free. They could still hear the voices of people in there, and hopefully I have the quote. He says it much more poignantly than I have just delivered it. But interviewing until someone laughs or cries, I think helps bring that emotion into your writing. So adding voice literally, I think that's on the heels of this, is just making sure you're packing your story full of other people saying things. So I think I can paraphrase, and as you can tell, I don't do it as well as Francis Simmons said that. So I actually have to formulaically think about adding dialogue to my stories. And I do it this way. I make a quote highlight reel, and it actually is the way that I outline. So after I've done all my research, I put all the quotes that I just loved together in a document, and then I just arrange them in the order that I want to tell the story. And then I write around that. And it actually ends up being a really great outline technique for me. So how that looked here, here are just some of the quotes. I'll click through them from this story that I feel like, after I rearranged them, created my arc. Okay, so here it is. We get up there, and they had these Polish Jews in there. They put them in a warehouse and had straw in there, and the Nazis set it on fire and then fled. We had to rescue them. Some of the Polish Jews, some of them were still alive. And then this is from Ora Mae on the plane when they were reading mail. They had a mail call where all their loved ones sent them letters, and she just said, "It's like we're going to heaven." And this is when she fed prisoners from the Bataan Death March. This was a gentleman who had lost both of his legs from the knees down and some of his fingers in a Vietnam explosion. And this is part of his recovery. Weights attached to the skin on the tops of his knees to try and stretch that skin so they could pull it over and stitch it back together. And this was from 4-star General Oakes, Robert C. Oakes, just commenting on the honor flight, that the most touching thing is to see these veterans. It's not only good for the veterans, it's good for the people of this country to see these veterans in wheelchairs and know that they served. And I felt like that really pulled what this whole thing was about together. So with that, those are some micro level tips about the research. I'll pass the baton to Peter here to go macro.
Thank you, Brittany. So Brittany is an amazing writer. She gets lots of awards for these articles that she does and has brought a lot of energy and really good ideas to our team. So I'm glad to have her be able to be the one to talk about some of those techniques that she does so well. So I want to talk just a little bit as an editor about the structure, because as we talk about content that sings, sometimes you can have a lot of good pieces down, but how to put them together in such a way that you'll be able to take readers across this chasm. So you have the chasm here that I'm depicting is the beginning of the article to the end. And in some ways of thinking about journalism, you don't worry so much about that. And you've probably heard of the inverted pyramid approach, but I've depicted it this way here. And you can see on my y-axis, that's the engagement level of the reader. So at the beginning, in the inverted pyramid approach, you have the 5 W's. All the news is put out right in front of you, and then you just kind of add on extra stuff. You don't care that much if the person, after a few paragraphs, gives up on the story, because they've really got the main story by then, and if they want to stay on for longer, that's great. That's not how we really think about it in terms of a magazine. Our goal is to have people stick with us all the way through, because we feel like there's a lot of great stuff we want to share. And also we like just maybe the organic unity of it, to have a story that is complete, isn't just top heavy or front heavy, but that carries the engagement and enthusiasm all the way through to the end. And so you might draw the arc a little bit more like this in a magazine story. And the way that we try to have that engagement stay high, of course, is that you have a strong intro that grabs people's attention and makes them want to know more about this thing. Then you've got all that stuff you want to talk about in the middle, and then you wrap up with some kind of conclusion that, again, brings the interest level back up. Well, this is a good idea, but some of our stories are super long, and that body section can go on for 2,000 words or more. Will the people stick with it? And I think the truth of the matter is that often they don't. They read that first part, they love it, they turn to that next spread, and it's tons of words, and they say, oh my gosh, I've got so much to do today, I don't have time for this. And so they drop off at some point. And so we go a little further, or at least we push for this. And one thing that we do a lot of in BYU Magazine, and you see it in a lot of magazines, is to use subheads, to have sections within the magazine that people can turn to. And so you have an intro section, then you have 3 or 4 or whatever body sections, and then a conclusion. I like to take it even a step further than this in terms of trying to hold on to that reader and keep a high level of engagement. And so what I often encourage authors to do is to think about each of those sections as if it were a mini story that is working together with all these other mini stories to tell the big story. And I guess when I'm saying story, I don't mean so much that necessarily each one is based around an anecdote, but each one has a similar arc happening within that section. And so if we were to kind of diagram this out like the diagram above that, you have a lead for the lead. You have a little bit of a conclusion to that lead. You have in the first body section, you have a lead to that, and you have a conclusion. So each time the reader might be just a little bit tempted to step away from the article, there's something back there to pull them back in and say, no, this is worth your time. This is good stuff. You don't want to step away too fast. This, I think, is a good model for a certain kind of story, and we do a lot of these. These are the big, long stories that really require that kind of holding on to the reader the whole way through. But what I'd like to kind of shift to now is talk about the fact that that's not the only way to tell a story. In fact, here we go. There are lots of ways to tell a story, and I think asking readers to read more than 1 or 2 3,000-word stories in an issue of a magazine is a pretty tall task to give them. And few people are going to stick around for all of that. So I just want to kind of quickly flash through a bunch of different kinds of stories that we've told. We're not the best at this, but we work hard at it. We try to think of what's the best way to tell the story? What's at least a different way? Like I said, we have lots of traditional stories. Brittany's talked about some that she's done so well on. But that's just one way to do it. And so here, of course, there are lots of options. And one of them that we're all very familiar with is the photo essay. And one time we took this a little bit to an extreme for us anyway. We decided to do a special issue that was just photos. But not really, it was primarily photos. But that was the point. It was 64 pages out of the issue were dedicated to one story. We sent out about 30 photographers and they covered BYU campus from midnight until midnight. And then we just put it all together. We actually had a ton of fun writing this story. And not because it was easy, it was a hard story, but it was a different kind of writing. We were writing lots of really quick captions and trying to say things in a fast, poignant sort of way. These fun little intros and things like that. So it was a very different kind of package than our typical story. And sadly, this kind of hurts our feelings. It was by far the most popular story we've ever done. People love it. So we write less, people like it more. I don't know how I feel about that. Here's another story that took a more of a photographic approach. We have students at BYU who are doing awesome things all the time, and we want to write this one-page news story about it, but there's like 20 kids on that page, and you can't write 20 one-page news stories. So we said, well, what if we were to find a way to just bring them all together into one spread? And so, I think this was maybe Brittany's idea, but we just have pictures of them essentially, and then a very quick blurb, just a few sentences to describe their achievement. Also, a very engaging way. We don't say everything you could say about them, but that's okay. We don't have to say everything about them. We just want to get a point across. Here's a story we did recently about the new Provo City Center Temple. Again, this one took more of a hybrid approach, I would say. And this one I wrote, and I had a really fun time doing it, partly because we could rely upon Brad Slade's great photography, but also I had kind of smaller tasks at hand. You can see there's these little pieces, and I was able to write really quick, short, punchy stories. And I didn't have to worry so much about weaving them together in this big, long narrative. I could just really focus in on that one moment. And it was a pretty successful story, I think, in terms of amount read. People were very willing to engage with that level of a commitment. Okay, here's kind of taking that to extreme. This was a big fold-out in the magazine. It was about the Bean Museum where they have the animals on display, and they'd had a big remodel. This was a story that Mike did, and again, bringing together the photography with lots of engaging short writing turned out for this one to be a pretty effective way to go. Okay, so that's kind of the photographic approach. Something that we talk about a lot right now is that we should do less talking about a subject in stories and more giving the people the thing that's so cool in the first place. I think it's tempting for us as writers to try to funnel everything through our voice and to try to do everything in our own way. But isn't it sometimes better just to give them the thing itself? And so here's a few examples of times that we've done that, if I can stay connected. So we have this really awesome chef at BYU who's the lead chef. I'm not sure what his title is, but he'd won some awards, and so we wanted to do something about him. And we could have written this really long story about how awesome his food is. But, it's food. You don't want to just, hear about it. So we, first of all, got a really great picture to go along with that brief bio about him. And then we added recipes. Now, I feel obligated to caution you here because we got the recipes wrong, like big time. He gave them to us wrong, and then we didn't test them. And anyway, don't do these recipes. But it was an awesome idea. So, doggone it. Here's another story. We wanted to do something on study abroad at BYU, and it's such a vibrant, great thing. And we could have done your traditional story about how the program started and who's in charge of it and what it's supposed to do for students. But it's kind of boring about something that's so interesting as that. And so someone had the idea, well, what if we made it more like a travel guide? So the people who have been there on a BYU study abroad are telling you about, when you go to Spain, you've got to do this. Don't miss that. And the students are talking about, the food that I loved the most was this. So that was what we created. And then we had some awesome design to help us out on this. But all these became one spread travel guides for going to that place that the students go to. It was huge. We had 16 pages of it. It kept designers up till all night long for 2 nights, but it was pretty cool. This is one that Brittany did, again, in the spirit of not just talking about it, but letting people experience it. This was regarding a couple of professors who study ethics at BYU. And what Brittany decided to do here was to turn it into a quiz for the reader. So essentially the question is, are you, dear reader, are you an ethical person? Here's how we're going to find out. So then she puts forward these scenarios that the professor suggested, and that's really it. And then the professors kind of weigh in on why you might choose this or why you might choose that. But this was an award-winning piece that we had with our CASE District 7, that's the organization that we're part of, and really I thought knocked it out of the park. Okay, and this one, again, just as an example of giving people the thing, there was this really cool experience where a professor came to campus, a non-member professor, and had this awesome experience when a student gave a prayer and he was touched by what the student said. And anyway, he posted about it on Facebook, and we said, oh, we got to do something with that. And we said, well, the best thing would be to just show him the post. So we just recreated the post. That was the whole article. We had a little intro, the post, and a few of the comments. And I think that's way more effective than our story would have been had we talked about somebody posting on Facebook. You can only recreate so well in our own paraphrasing. Sorry, Apple, I stole that. So when Bronco Mendenhall left, we thought we should do something on the departing coach, and we started doing our normal brainstorming and thought, oh yeah, we should have Tom Holmo, the athletic director, write a little, wish you well, Bronco, you did such a good job here for us thing. And we thought, that's super boring. And so then we thought, well, how else could we do this? And we kind of made a list of all the things that Bronco was known for, good things and bad things and in-between things. And we said, well, let's just give him a list, 10 hallmarks from the Bronco Mendenhall era. And it gave us a chance to be kind of funny with it and joke around a little bit and not take it so seriously. So that was a different way to approach that one. Okay, this was a fun article that Brittany did. We have a perennial challenge at BYU that some of our groups, for instance, the Cougarettes and the rugby team, tend to win every year. And you can only write that story so many times. They persevered and they won the championship. Well, but what are you going to do this time about it? And so this time we decided, they both won the national championships. We thought, well, who's better between rugby and Cougarettes? And can we somehow try to quantify that? And it was kind of a specious argument. But anyway, we had this little mock fight between the Cougarettes and rugby. I think it was a tie. Nobody won. Finally, this was a story about an art exhibit at BYU. You might have seen it. It was Norman Rockwell's pieces. And when we do stories about art exhibits, they tend not to be very well read. I don't know why. People look at the pictures maybe, but they don't really dive into the content. And so we thought, how can we make this one really accessible to people and make it feel important? And so what we did this time was, instead of writing about the exhibit so much, we just presented some of the pictures. And then we invited professors on campus to write personal essays based on their response to the picture. So they looked at the picture and said, what does it make me think about? And they wrote about something in their life that the image evoked. So, my goodness. We had one about this famous painting about Ruby Bridges and several other really poignant and powerful stories and pictures. Finally, I'm going too long, but I just wanted to say, one of the things that we've tried to do is to have variety. And I think this issue that we did about 10 years ago, which was a special issue about music at BYU, did really well at that idea of telling stories in lots of different ways. And we had some that were very traditional. We had a profile about a professor who is a jazz musician. We had another story that you don't see here about the Mormon Tabernacle Choir and all the alumni who were part of that. But then you have a photo essay here about BYU performing groups. You've got a personal essay about the informal music culture on campus. And you have this really audacious spread. I'm still not sure it was a very good idea, but it was kind of fun. So we just packed as many people as we could on a spread. Didn't even regard the gutters. We went right across the gutters, just put as many people there. And the whole point was, there's a lot of people who graduate from BYU and are doing cool things in music. I don't know if anybody read it, but the point I hope is made that this is really kind of a big thing. And then the last one up here in the corner is a story. It's a display that shows how some BYU professors are connected through their mentors all the way back to Bach and Beethoven and other amazing composers from the past. So that was a really fun one to do research on and see that it doesn't take too many generations of links to get back to some pretty big names. Okay, 10 minutes for story time with Michael. Sorry.
Here's my object lesson. I'm going to have Brittany and Peter help me with this. All right. I'm just going to talk about the thing. I'm not going to give you the thing. No, we're going to give you the thing. So, high chews. Does anybody know the story behind high chews? Where they originated? Anybody? Okay. I guess in Japanese culture, if you take something out of your mouth, that's kind of a cultural taboo. And so a man named Taichiro Morinaga came up with high chews so that you could chew your gum and then swallow it and be culturally awesome. So I'm going to have... I'm aware. So, thanks, Andrew. So, Here we go. I want everybody to take out your wallets, jewelry, phones, put it out on the chair, and then I want you to close your eyes. Okay, there's a few people who are mentally blocking this idea, being disobedient. I'm just kidding. I really just want you to close your eyes. And I want you to go to your happy place, wherever that may be, some location on planet Earth. Okay, open your eyes. Aren't you sad to be back? Okay. Now, if you were somewhere warm, I want you to raise your hand. If you were with family, I want you to raise your hand. If you were by yourself. No, I love my family. Okay, so if it required a plane to get there, raise your hand. If it was the plane. Okay, if it was cold and you were on the plane. Here we go with the story. So all that's just my notes. You don't want to see any of that. We're going to go back to, oops, I just gave away my whole lesson. Does it go back? Anybody who knows what these are, now that you saw the answer, you should raise your hand, and Brittany and Peter should throw you a piece of candy. So what are these? I think just pass it around. I want to get rid of this whole bag in the next 4 minutes. Onomatopoeic words. Okay, what are these? This is going to be random. I'm known as King of the Tangents. What are they? And specifically, oh yeah. What? So these are a bunch of examples that I'm skipping so we can get to story time because we're short. So this is one of the most disappointing words in the English language to me because it's not what it says it is. You can't trust this word. So if it were to be true to itself, it'd be palindromemordinlap, right? That would feel right. More examples. Brittany and Peter already covered all the really good ones. So shortest sentence in English. We're just doing the quiz because it's fun. Everybody's awake. Any guesses? Shortest sentence. Any? You'd think I do, I am. It's actually go. All right, we're getting to the story. So Ray Matheny is a professor of anthropology, he's now emeritus. And this is his story. It was minus 56 degrees Celsius at 25,000 feet on the morning of January 4th, 1944. The B-17 bomber came equipped with bombs, guns, sophisticated navigation equipment, and a crew of 10 men, but no heater. The crew had only heated flight suits and adrenaline to stave off the chill. They couldn't touch the inside of the plane because their skin would stick to the frozen metal. The oxygen they breathed through masks was frigid, filling their lungs with Arctic blasts on every breath. At age 18, Ray T. Matheny was the flight engineer under the direction of a 20-year-old pilot and a 23-year-old co-pilot. The eldest member of their crew was a 28-year-old who kept the kids in check. They called him the deacon and themselves the sinners. Their plane they dubbed the Deacon Sinners. The assignment that morning was a submarine raid at Kiel, Germany. The overcast skies were full of planes, all flown by kids, recalls Matheny, 60, now a BYU anthropology professor. Matheny's bomber successfully dropped its load and had turned for home when it was attacked by German fighters. Matheny and a fighter exchanged rounds. Soon the fighter's propeller seized. The disabled plane was headed right at them. I yelled over the intercom to jump it, Matheny says, but immediately there was a terrific explosion that threw Matheny out of his turret. I knew we had a dead airplane. Nobody had to tell me to bail out. He reached for his parachute and clasped the right side, but as he reached for the left, he couldn't lift his arm and he was pushed to the floor. The plane was in a flat spin. He craned his head to see the cockpit. The pilot was fighting the controls, but both he and the co-pilot were being smashed into their seats by the force of the spinning bomber. There was no way they could get out of the plane. Matheny dragged himself down a corridor toward the escape hatch. The plane was coming apart and he had to crawl through wires and debris. rolling to keep the blood in his head. When he got to the hatch, he saw another crew member struggling to reach the escape hatch, but the spin pinned him on his back. Matheny was too far away to help him. Matheny managed to pull the pins that held the hatch, but the fuselage of the plane was so twisted the door didn't release. His oxygen supply didn't reach that far, and he was losing blood to his brain. With his last strength, he pounded the door, and then he passed out. A lot of cliffhangers. I mean, almost every line. He awoke free falling in the icy air. For a few dreamy moments, he didn't know where he was. The bomber had exploded, blowing Matheny out of the unlocked hatch. He came to in a start and grabbed the ripcord, still hooked just to his right side. The parachute ripped open and displaced his left ribs. This is kind of that slow-mo moment that Brittany talked about capturing. As he drifted to earth, fiery pieces of his plane streamed past, some small bits slipping off his silky white canopy. It was surreal to see my airplane coming down in thousands of pieces around me. When he neared the ground, he was headed toward power lines. They didn't give us much training on these parachutes, about 15 minutes worth, so I didn't know how to control it, Matheny remembers. He collapsed the chute and fell to the earth, crashing through the ice of a frozen canal. I just crawled up on the ice. I didn't care. I was so happy to be alive. Matheny was found and taken prisoner. He spent 16 months in Stalag 17B, the infamous Nazi prisoner of war camp in Krems, Austria. There he suffered malnutrition, sickness, and mental and physical trauma, culminating with an 18-day march to his liberation at the Western Front in April 1945. All that World War II experience in prison and everything taught me how to survive, Matheny says. So that's one of those openers that we always seem to reference when we're talking about a good open. How do you get somebody's attention? How do you keep their attention? And I was going to stop at every slide and say, oh, well, that's a good place to stop. And I know when I was reading it, it's like, no, you have to keep going. I actually talked to Lisa yesterday, or chatted with her, and it's like, how did you get all of that detail? You weren't in the plane. You weren't, and this is what she said. She said she wishes she could have attributed it to her sharp interviewing and journalistic skills, but mostly he was just a great interview, and he told the story, and she was able to go take those facts or those ideas, fact check them, make sure they were accurate, and then turn it into this great lead. It says, I got lucky partly because I shut up. Sometimes I have a bad habit of jumping into the interview when I really should just let them ramble. Be prepared to ask smart and probing questions, but also be prepared to let them talk without you commenting. That's a great interviewing technique that we can all use. Okay, longest word, English language. Any thoughts? That's a good one. Supercalifragilistic. No. Pneumo-ultramicroscopic silicovolcanoconiosis. So stay away from volcanoes. And these I didn't know these, so I was just going to share them in case you're doing hangman. I used to use the word lynx all the time, L-Y-N-X, because there's no obvious vowels. Tisk. I'm going to use that next time. I thought that was awesome. Longest monosyllabic word, one syllable. Yeah. This will come in handy later. Okay, I'm just going to finish up real quick with, I was able to go to Monterey a decade ago, more. They do a spring term biology class out there, and so I was able to hang out with the students and the professor. This is a moment that it was one of those moments where, well, like you saw the dog, you saw the little kid. A seal, harbor seal, popped its head up as we were gathered around by the seashore. And I thought, well, we'll just start this out from his perspective. What does he think of all these humans who are observing him? What's his observation of them? So it's just capturing a moment from a different point of view. This one was just to use dialogue and quotes, tell the stories in the words of the people who it's their story. And then, this is probably one of my favorite things that I ever wrote. It was about this professor who was kind of a father figure to all these kids, and he would start off his lessons with prayer, scripture, and an Aesop's fable. And then there was this great story that one of his graduate students, well, now a graduate, told about how she was over in the Woodsoe buildings with all the aquaria, and a mother was there, and she was looking at the lobster tank, and she said, "Oh, look, kids, look at this great crab." And she was like, "Oh, should I go out there and tell them it's really a lobster? Because they're so wrong." And he was saying, "Don't do it." Said, "You don't want to take away the mother's credibility in front of her children. It doesn't really matter." And it was just his kindness. Finally, the whole thing boiled down to just this professor's kindness, finding that characteristic that he was passing on to his students that then made a difference in their lives. And it's just one of those perfect packages for me where he uses Aesop fables and then his life was this moral tale that he was passing along. So the moral for me was it's cool to be smart. It's better to be kind. There you go. I think that's all we have time for and all that we have in our presentation. Thank you for coming today.